Alright, problem number 2. When two whole numbers are added, their sum is 51, and when they are multiplied, their product is 560. What is the difference between the two numbers? Alright, well, let's assign some variables here, because I think it would be helpful to turn these statements into equations. Alright, so here we know that two whole numbers, they're added, and their sum is 51. So let's call the two numbers x and y. Alright, and if we add x and y, we get 51, right? And the second statement here says that when they're multiplied, the product is 560. So if we take x times y, we get 560. Alright, so there's a couple of ways you could approach this. One would be to just, we could solve for x in terms of y, or y in terms of x, and then we could substitute, alright, because we have two equations and two unknowns. But in this case, they aren't linear equations, right? This one's linear, but this one, we have x times y, which is not linear. But we could solve this. We could say that x is equal to, or how about if we do this? Doesn't really matter, I guess, but what if we say y is equal to 560 over x, and then we try to substitute it over here. So then we get x plus 560 over x, right? Oops, I guess I forgot to put the x over here. Alright, so we're just substituting. Wherever we see y, we put in 560 over x, and that's equal to 51. And let's look at the x off the bottom. So if we multiply this whole thing by x, and this thing by x, we end up with x squared plus 560 is equal to 51x, which we can rearrange as x squared minus 51x plus 560. Oops, not 550, but 560. Oops. 560 equals 0. Now, that's a quadratic equation, and if you know how to solve quadratic equations, one thing that you could do is use the quadratic formula and plug it in and figure that out. Or, but essentially you've got to solve this quadratic equation. But this is essentially equivalent to what we just said, that the sum of the two numbers is equal to 51 and the product is 560. So I'm actually going to solve it a different way, because I'm not going to assume you know how to solve a quadratic equation, although if you haven't learned it, you will shortly. But I want to show you another way to solve it, and that's by looking at the factors of 560, which is often a good way to solve quadratic equations. Okay, in fact, I used to give my son problems. Just in the car, I used to play games with him and give him a number and say, what two numbers add to 5 and multiply to 6? And so he would figure that out for me. But those are the kinds of things you have to think about when you're solving quadratic equations. So, so let's look at the factors of 560. All right, and see if we can find two factors of 560 that add to 51. All right, so I'm just going to start by coming up with a prime factorization. So this is equal to what? 2 times 280. All right, or that can be factored into 2 times 140, and this can be factored into 2 times 70, and this can be factored into 2 times 35, right? And then 35 is 5 times 7, and 5 and 7 are prime. So essentially we have 2 to the 4th times 5 times 7, okay? So let's look at what the factors would be. We would have, 2 times 280, but those wouldn't add to, those two wouldn't add to 51. We'd have 4 times 140. We'd have 8 times 70, but those don't add to 51. Let's try 16 times 35. Okay, if you add 16 and 35, you do get 51. Okay, so these two numbers work. 16 and 35 add to 51, and 16 times 35 multiplied to 560. So hey, those work. So, but don't forget, you've got to go back and read the question. They didn't ask you for what the factors are. They asked you what is the difference between the numbers. Alright, so we have 35 and we have 16, so let's just subtract the two and we get 19. So this is the actual answer, 19, because if you read the problem, that's what they're asking for. So don't forget that. Always go back and read the problem when you think you're done, and make sure that you answered the question that they asked. There you go.